We Bury the Dead is an Australian zombie drama that I have to preface by saying is not a traditional genre film, and frankly near impossible to talk about without indirectly spoiling it, so consider this your warning going forward. It tells the story of Ava, an American physiotherapist who volunteers as part of a body retrieval and disposal unit for the Australian military after the United States accidentally deploys an experimental EMP nuke off the coast of Tasmania that kills the entire population of the island. However, as protests and outcry occur globally as Australia and the UN attempt to hold the unnamed US president accountable, the volunteers are warned that many of those who perished in the wider pulse blast have seemingly come back online and are slowly regaining cognitive functions. The military explain that the lights are on but nobody is home, and require volunteers to alert soldiers of any docile undead so they may be euthanized and given the dignity they deserve. You can probably tell from the tone of my voice that I'm doing air quotes here because the language the military uses is trying to dehumanize the dead to desensitize volunteers to the job at hand, while still showing some effort at compassion for the many like Ava who have volunteered in order to find their loved ones under the pretense there may be a chance at bringing them back. As the volunteers bluntly smash their way into houses and coldly drag the dead onto the streets as ironic opera music plays to reinforce the moment, you're reminded how little dignity actually exists in death in these devastating circumstances. By planting us firmly into this bleak and broodingly realistic backdrop, we're made to feel the grueling intimate weight of real-world scenarios the setup potentially alludes to. Yet, it mainly serves to establish Ava's emotional journey to find her husband Mitch, who is believed to be at a resort in Woodbridge as part of a work retreat just outside the city of Holbert that was decimated in the explosion. While Ava is permitted to volunteer under the Compassionate Grounds exemption for disaster victim identification, she's faced with understandable adversity given America is not exactly in Australia's good books, as she becomes immersed in the collective grief of those trying to make sense and find closure amongst the chaos. Again, I have to stress this isn't what I would call an exciting or entertaining film. While there are moments of tension, horror, and brutally provocative and macabre visuals, We Bury the Dead is a slow burn meditation on the false hope and denial we experience as we desperately seek to prove to ourselves that our situation will be different from everyone else's. The trailer sells it as a bit of a zombie action thriller, but that is further from the truth. This is one of those it comes at night cases where yes, many of the undead do prove to be dangerous later in the story, but what truly got under my skin the most was the pure sadness in what they represent. The film evokes the modern apocalyptic purgatorial sensibilities of Cormac McCarthy's The Road and David Meshid's The Rover to give it a deeply somber quality as we witness both the living and the dead collectively wander a beautiful but now tragically condemned landscape like lost souls with unfinished business. In fact, unfinished business is the exact wording used by the bereaved to describe why the dead may be returning, if indeed it's purely symbolic as opposed to the reality that they are just growing increasingly feral by the day. In Ava's case, her steadfast hope that Mitch may be one of the reactivated is first shared with a stranger on a plane who also hopes for the same closure for her son. Yet, while the stranger does later find her son, she's left in complete anguish that he did not come back, thus building on Ava's increasing fear that her quest is inevitably futile. This is an important detail because I could sit and tease you about whether or not Mitch is alive or reanimated, but the movie is pretty clear about not feeding you the same copium as Ava. The moral of the story is not about validating her hope, because that would undo the reality of grief and how we don't always have the luxury of closure or saying our goodbyes the way that we want, but instead making her confront the grief she's constantly denying of herself. Now, with that said, throughout the story we get small fragmented memories of Ava and Mitch's relationship that slowly reveal turbulence in their marriage as they try to conceive a child that leaves Ava guilt-ridden for not being able to properly address and resolve before Mitch left on his work retreat. I'll talk about this near the end because it's a bold revelation that recontextualizes much of Ava's motive, but let's just say it's definitely not where I expected it to go. Anyway, Ava soon befriends a charming but relatively apathetic and suppressively frustrated volunteer called Clay, who agrees to help her bypass military zones to find her husband, only to along their journey encounter a suspicious lone soldier called Riley, who separates the pair and agrees to give Ava safe passage to Woodbridge. It's here in Act 2 where the film leans into its darker sensibilities, as Riley takes Ava to a secluded bed and breakfast where both characters share the same faintly delusional belief that their situations may be different and they might get to reconnect with their loved ones again. Riley reflects on his excitement of being a father and ruminates on the happy memories he was ready to create before that future was wiped away from him in an instant, comparing this cruelty to those who have time to say goodbye to their dying loved ones. It clearly embittered and shattered him mentally, as he then reveals his hand by requesting that in exchange for helping Ava find her husband, she briefly roleplay as Riley's wife Kitty to allow him to relive an intimate dance that leads them to both indulge in their own escapist memories before the moment is disrupted when Ava refuses to take off her wedding ring for Kitty's. In an altercation, we learn that Riley has been studying the undead to understand how to reactivate his deceased impregnated wife Kitty because he claims he can hear his son alive inside of her. Thus, he theorizes their nature is to complete unfinished business, which for Kitty would be to birth their son. Ava ends up killing Riley after discovering multiple undead in captivity, only to then see Kitty resurrected, sparking hope in Ava that she still may have a chance at finishing things off with Mitch. This entire ordeal doesn't simply exist to create drama and tension, it serves to reinforce Ava's grief and denial as she takes Riley's theory as confirmation of her own beliefs. Of course, if you've made it this far, the film is very evidently on the nose with its themes, and nowhere is that more apparent than when Ava soon sees one of the undead returning to literally bury themselves and their family. It's heartbreaking in a way that hit me far harder than I expected. Having to bury your own loved ones is not something I've experienced to the most personal extent, if you know what I mean, in that they've never been someone who was extremely close to me. But the film had me reflecting on my old school teacher I've referenced in videos before, who passed away 14 years ago suddenly, and I never had a chance to say goodbye or thank you for all the help they gave me in figuring out who I was. It's still the most profound grief I've ever felt. Not that that's something you can measure, obviously, and the film brought all those feelings back up because of how honest it was about closure up to that point. However, the film then takes a different and challenging direction. When Ava finally arrives at the resort, she unceremoniously finds Mitch dead. He doesn't come back, he has no unfinished business, and instead of making Ava sad, it leaves her angry. Why? Well, it's revealed that in their failure to conceive, Ava had an affair prior to Mitch going on his work trip, revealing that her grief is ultimately driven by guilt for the shitty situation she created. She discovers Mitch then cheated on her while on the trip, which I take as his way at revenge, thus he has no unfinished business because he leveled the playing field, so to crassly speak, but nevertheless, it leaves this ugly, messy situation between them completely unresolved, and Ava has to live with that. Clay then miraculously arrives looking for Ava, and his reaction to her infidelity confession is suitably human. He goes quiet and then awkwardly diverts his attention to his own situation. You're under the vague illusion early on that Clay lost loved ones in the chaos, and while technically true, Clay explains he's actually estranged from his wife and daughter because of ambiguously selfish reasons, and his voluntary effort was ironically a selfish act to prove his selflessness to them. Not to sound morally reductive, but it basically concludes that they're both shitty people doomed to live with the consequences of their mistakes, but that doesn't invalidate the emotional journey they go through. It's a bold choice to not make them conventionally good people because we're so conditioned to only having empathy for those we morally align with when the film asks if we can have some room to extend it onto those we don't. It's honestly a challenging sentiment in this day and age. You don't have to like them. I was genuinely flabbergasted by Ava's infidelity, but that does not make the grief she and even Riley go through any less real and impactful. It doesn't redeem the characters for their behaviours as the ending potentially implies. After giving Mitch a burial at sea, Ava and Clay journey back only to discover Katie on the road having finally given birth to a living baby boy. However, given the revelations, I refuse to see this as some sort of rebirth metaphor, as I believe that would completely undo the point of the story. Instead, I've come to see it as a sort of poetically bastardized subversion of hope, where yes, Ava gets the child she's always wanted, but the baby is born out of the pain and destruction Ava has been confronted with. In the effect of Monkey's Paw, Ava can have her emotional reward, so to speak, but she will still have to live with being reminded of the grief, guilt, and hurt that may heal with time, reflection, and self-forgiveness, but cannot ever truly be buried.